The furnace in our basement had been making that grinding noise for 3 weeks, like an old man clearing his throat every 10 minutes. Christmas Eve seemed like the perfect time for it to finally give up completely, leaving us with nothing but cold air whistling through the vents and my wife Jessica complaining about the temperature every 5 minutes. I was down there with my toolbox, flashlight clenched between my teeth, trying to figure out why the pilot light kept going out. The house above me buzzed with activity. Jessica preparing for our annual Christmas Eve dinner, my 17-year-old daughter Maddie texting constantly on her phone, and the sound of my cousin Brad's voice carrying down through the floorboards. Brad had been spending a lot of time at our house lately. Too much time, if you ask me, but nobody ever did. He was the golden boy of our family, successful real estate agent, expensive suits, perfect smile that made all the church ladies flutter their eyelashes. Everything I wasn't, according to my mother-in-law Helen, who never missed a chance to remind Jessica what a catch Brad was and how unfortunate it was that he was still single. The irony of that statement would hit me like a sledgehammer about 30 seconds later. I was adjusting the thermostat connection when I heard Jessica's voice drift down from the kitchen directly above me. The old house had thin floors, and sound carried easily between the basement and the first floor. She was talking quietly, which was unusual. Jessica never talked quietly about anything. "You need to be more careful," she was saying. "Tom's not stupid, even if he acts like it sometimes." My hands froze on the wrench. She was talking about me, and not in the loving way wives usually discuss their husbands during the holidays. "He's too trusting," came Brad's voice, smooth and confident as always. "Besides, he's always got his head buried in some repair project or down at that boxing gym. Guy's completely oblivious to what's happening in his own house." I set the wrench down carefully, trying not to make any noise. Something cold was settling in my stomach, and it had nothing to do with the broken furnace. "Still," Jessica continued, "we need to be smarter about this, especially now with the baby coming." "Baby? What baby?" Jessica was 42 years old. We'd never talked about having another child. Maddie was 17 and heading to college next year. We were done with babies. "Our baby," Brad said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "God, Jess, I can't wait until we can stop pretending. This whole charade is exhausting. Our baby, not my baby. Our baby." Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stood there in the basement, surrounded by decades of accumulated junk and the smell of heating oil, while my world rearranged itself around me. My wife of 20 years was pregnant with my cousin's child. The cousin who came to every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every important moment in our lives. The cousin who slapped me on the back and called me buddy and borrowed money he never paid back. "Father Donnelly says we just need to be patient," Jessica was saying. "He thinks Tom will come around to the idea of the baby once it's born. Men always do," he says. "And if Tom never finds out the truth, then nobody gets hurt." Father Donnelly. Our family priest, the man who'd married Jessica and me, who'd baptized Maddie, who gave inspiring sermons every Sunday about honesty and faithfulness and the sanctity of marriage. He knew about this. He was helping them. "I still think we should just tell him," Brad said. "Get it over with. Tom's a decent guy. He'll step aside if we explain that we're in love." "Are you insane?" Jessica's voice sharpened. "Do you have any idea what a divorce would cost me? Tom might be a simple mechanic, but his lawyer isn't stupid. If he can prove adultery, I could lose everything. The house, my practice, maybe even custody of Maddie." Simple mechanic. 20 years of marriage, and that's how she saw me. A simple mechanic who was too stupid to notice his own wife carrying another man's child. "Besides," she continued, "Tom's harmless. He'll grumble and complain, but he won't actually do anything. He never does." I heard footsteps moving away from the kitchen, probably toward the living room where Father Donnelly was waiting with his glass of wine and his knowing smile. I stood there in the basement for another 10 minutes, listening to the sounds of my family preparing for Christmas dinner, while I processed the fact that my family no longer existed. When I finally went upstairs, I found them all in the living room. Jessica was arranging cookies on a plate, her dark hair pulled back in the elegant style she wore to court. She looked beautiful, successful, completely composed, not like a woman who'd just been discussing her husband's stupidity with her lover. Brad was sprawled in my favorite chair, the leather recliner I'd bought myself for my 40th birthday. He was wearing an expensive sweater that probably cost more than I made in a week, his blonde hair perfectly styled even though it was Christmas Eve. He looked up when I entered and gave me that $1,000,000 smile. "Hey there, buddy. Get that furnace working?" "Still working on it," I said. My voice sounded normal, which surprised me. Might need to call a professional after the holidays. "You know I could lend you the money for a new one," Brad offered, the same way he always offered to help with things we couldn't afford. "Consider it a Christmas present." "That's generous," I said, "but I prefer to handle my own problems." Father Donnelly looked up from his wine glass. He was a thin man in his 50s, with gray hair and pale blue eyes that always seemed to be looking right through you. "Tom, you look troubled. Everything all right?" I studied his face, looking for signs of guilt or deception. He looked exactly the same as always, concerned, paternal, ready to offer spiritual guidance to anyone who needed it. If I hadn't heard the conversation in the kitchen, I never would have suspected he was part of their scheme. "Just tired," I said. "Long day at the shop." "You work too hard," Jessica said without looking up from her cookies. "Maybe you should take some time off after the holidays. You've been so tense lately." Tense. That was one way to describe discovering your wife was pregnant with your cousin's baby while your priest helped cover it up. "Maybe I will," I said. Maddie wandered in from the kitchen, phone in hand as always. She had Jessica's dark hair and sharp features, but she'd inherited my stubborn streak and my tendency toward sarcasm. She glanced around the room and rolled her eyes. "This is so weird," she announced. "Like, why are we pretending this is a normal Christmas when everyone knows something's going on?" The room went very quiet. Jessica's hands stilled on the cookie plate. Brad shifted in his chair. Father Donnelly took a careful sip of wine. "What do you mean, honey?" Jessica asked. "Come on, Mom. I'm not blind. You and Uncle Brad have been acting weird for months, and Dad's been walking around like someone stole his dog." She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "I'm not stupid, you know. I can tell when adults are keeping secrets." I felt something shift inside my chest. My daughter knew. Maybe not the details, but she knew something was wrong. And unlike me, she wasn't pretending everything was fine. "There are no secrets here," Jessica said firmly. "We're just excited about Christmas." Maddie snorted. "Right. That's why Uncle Brad's car is here every time I come home from school. That's why you've been whispering on the phone all the time. That's why Dad looks like he wants to punch something every time he looks at you two." "Madison," Father Donnelly said in his gentle priest voice, "perhaps you're reading too much into—" "Don't," Maddie interrupted. "Just don't. I'm 17, not 7. I know when adults are lying to me." She stormed out of the room, leaving the four of us in uncomfortable silence. I looked around at the faces of the people who'd been lying to me, planning behind my back, treating me like I was too stupid to notice my own life falling apart. "Kids," Brad said with a nervous laugh, "they think everything's drama." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe kids see things more clearly than adults give them credit for." I excused myself and went to the kitchen to get a drink. While I was there, I noticed Jessica's purse sitting on the counter, her phone sticking out of the side pocket. She always kept her phone close, but she'd been distracted by the conversation with Maddie. I glanced toward the living room, heard them talking in low voices, probably discussing how to handle Maddie's outburst. Without really thinking about it, I picked up Jessica's phone. It was unlocked. She always forgot to enable the lock screen when she was at home. I opened her text messages and scrolled down until I found Brad's name. The most recent message was from this morning. Can't wait for tonight. Once we tell everyone about the baby, we can stop sneaking around. I scrolled up, reading weeks of messages between my wife and my cousin, plans for secret meetings, complaints about having to pretend they weren't together, explicit details about their relationship that made my stomach turn. And then I found the message that changed everything. Tom's such a trusting fool. Even when this is all over, he'll probably still think the baby is his. Some men just refuse to see what's right in front of them. I put the phone back in her purse and returned to the living room. They were still talking quietly, but they stopped when I entered. Jessica looked up with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everything okay? Perfect, I said. Everything's absolutely perfect. I sat down on the couch and looked around the room, at my wife, my cousin, my priest, all of them part of a conspiracy to make me look like a fool. They thought I was too trusting, too simple, too harmless to be a threat. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Christmas dinner was a masterpiece of pretense. Jessica had outdone herself with the decorations, fresh pine garland draped along the mantel, candles flickering in the windows, a tree that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Everything looked perfect, just like she always insisted it should. I sat at the head of our dining room table, carving the turkey, while conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Helen, my mother-in-law, was telling Father Donnelly about her volunteer work at the church. Maddie was texting under the table, occasionally rolling her eyes at something one of the adults said. Jessica and Brad sat across from each other, careful not to make eye contact too often, but I caught the little glances they shared when they thought no one was looking. Tom, you're awfully quiet tonight, Helen observed. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 60s who'd never quite forgiven her daughter for marrying a mechanic instead of a doctor or lawyer. Everything all right at the shop? Business is good, I said, passing her a plate of turkey. People always need their cars fixed, especially in winter. Such important work, she said in the tone she reserved for discussing things she considered beneath her notice. Though I imagine it must be difficult, all that manual labor. Not like Brad's work. Real estate requires such intelligence, such people skills. Brad smiled modestly. Different kinds of work, Aunt Helen. Tom's got skills I could never learn. Takes a special kind of mind to understand how all those mechanical parts work together. He was being gracious, playing the humble cousin while my mother-in-law praised him. But I could hear the condescension underneath. A special kind of mind, the kind that was good with tools, but not smart enough to see what was happening in his own house. Still, Helen continued, it's wonderful that Jessica's practice is doing so well. Criminal law is so demanding, so intellectually challenging. I'm sure it's a relief for her to have something stimulating after spending all day dealing with... She gestured vaguely in my direction. Mother, Jessica said quietly, but she didn't sound particularly upset. I'm just saying, it's nice that she has her career. Gives her something to think about besides household concerns. Household concerns. Like her husband, apparently. Father Donnelly cleared his throat. Helen, I think you're underestimating Tom's contributions to this family. A man who works with his hands, who provides for his family through honest labor. There's something biblical about that. Jesus himself was a carpenter. Of course, Helen said quickly. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. But she had meant exactly that, and we all knew it. I'd been listening to variations of this conversation for 20 years, watching Helen praise Brad while dismissing me as Jessica's unfortunate choice. What I'd never realized was that Jessica agreed with her. Actually, I said, setting down the carving knife, I've been thinking about making some changes in the new year. The table went quiet. Jessica looked up from her plate with surprise. What kind of changes? She asked. Well, since you find my work so unstimulating, I said, looking directly at her, Maybe it's time I found something more intellectually challenging. Tom, I never said— You didn't have to say it. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. It's amazing what you can learn about people when you really pay attention. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Buddy, I think you might be misinterpreting. Am I? I turned to look at him. Tell me, Brad, what exactly do you think I'm misinterpreting? He glanced at Jessica, then back at me. I just think maybe you're reading too much into casual conversation. Nobody here thinks less of you because you're a mechanic. No, of course not. You just think less of me because I'm a trusting fool? The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Jessica went very still. Father Donnelly reached for his wine glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Tom? Jessica said carefully. What's this about? I looked around the table at all of them. My wife, my cousin, my priest, my mother-in-law, my daughter. Maddie had put down her phone and was watching with the fascination of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. It's about honesty, I said. It's about trust. It's about the fact that some people think they're so much smarter than everyone else that they can get away with anything. I think maybe you've had too much wine, Helen said nervously. I've had exactly 2 glasses, same as always. My mind is perfectly clear. I stood up and walked to the sideboard where Jessica kept her good china. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen things more clearly. I picked up one of her expensive crystal wine glasses, the one she only brought out for special occasions. You know what I realized today? I've been thinking about this all wrong. I've been focused on what I was losing instead of what I was gaining. What are you gaining? Maddie asked. She was the only one who didn't look nervous. Freedom, I said. The freedom that comes from finally understanding who people really are. I set the glass down carefully and returned to my seat. For instance, I understand now that my wife thinks I'm too stupid to notice when she's lying to me. I understand that my cousin thinks I'm too weak to do anything about it even if I did notice. I understand that my priest thinks forgiveness is more important than honesty. Father Donnelly leaned forward. Tom, whatever you think you know. I don't think anything, Father. I know. The question is, what am I going to do about it? The room was completely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jessica was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Brad looked like he was calculating the distance to the door. Well, I said, picking up my fork, this turkey is delicious, honey. You've really outdone yourself this year. I took a bite and chewed slowly while everyone else sat frozen around the table. The normalcy of the action seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. Tom, Jessica said quietly, I think we need to talk. Do we? About what? About whatever's bothering you. About these accusations you're making. I haven't made any accusations. I've just been sharing some observations about trust and honesty. Seems appropriate for Christmas, don't you think, Father? Father Donnelly was looking at me with something that might have been respect mixed with concern. Tom, if you have something to say, perhaps it would be better to speak plainly. You're right, I said. Plain speaking is probably best, so here's something plain. I know about the baby. Jessica went white. Brad knocked over his wine glass, sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a stain that would never come out. What baby? Helen asked, looking confused. The baby my wife is carrying, I said calmly. The baby that's going to be born in about 7 months. The baby that's going to look an awful lot like my cousin Brad. Maddie's eyes went wide. Mom, you're pregnant? Jessica couldn't seem to find her voice. She sat there opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. Congratulations are in order, I suppose, I continued. It's not every day a man finds out he's going to be an uncle and a stepfather at the same time. Tom, please, Brad started to say. Please what? Please pretend I don't know? Please keep being the trusting fool you all think I am? I stood up again, this time moving toward the door. I think dinner's over. Where are you going? Jessica found her voice at last. Out, I said. I need some air. All this family togetherness is making me feel a little sick. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet and walked out into the cold December night, leaving them all sitting around the ruins of Christmas dinner. The temperature had dropped since afternoon, and ice was starting to form on the sidewalks. Perfect weather for the season that was coming. I got in my truck and drove aimlessly through the empty streets of our little town. Most people were inside with their families, celebrating the holiday, exchanging gifts, pretending their lives were as perfect as the Christmas cards they sent out every year. I ended up at Murphy's Bar, the only place in town that stayed open on Christmas Eve. It was nearly empty except for a few other refugees from family gatherings and Mike Murphy himself wiping down glasses behind the bar. Tom, he said when I walked in, didn't expect to see you tonight. Thought you'd be home with the family. Change of plans, I said, taking a seat at the bar. Whiskey, neat. He poured the drink and set it in front of me. Everything all right? I took a sip and felt the burn all the way down. You know, Mike, I've been thinking about trust lately, about how some people see it as a virtue and other people see it as a weakness. That's pretty deep for Christmas Eve. My wife is pregnant with my cousin's baby, and my priest is helping them cover it up. How's that for deep? Mike stopped wiping the glass he was holding. Jesus, Tom. Yeah, that's what I said. Well, not exactly what I said, but close enough. What are you going to do? I finished my whiskey and set the glass down. I'm going to show them what happens when a trusting fool stops being trusting. That sounds ominous. Does it? I smiled, and it felt strange on my face. I prefer to think of it as educational. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to my shop and slept on the old couch in the office, surrounded by the familiar smells of motor oil and metal. It was more honest than my house, where everything looked perfect on the surface while rotting underneath. Jessica called 6 times before midnight, then gave up. I let every call go to voicemail, but I listened to each message. The progression was interesting. Anger, then concern, then something that might have been panic by the final call. Tom, this is ridiculous. Come home so we can talk about this like adults. Tom, I know you're upset, but walking out on Christmas Eve isn't solving anything. Tom, please call me back. We need to discuss this situation rationally. Tom, I'm worried about you. Whatever you think you heard, we can work through this. By the 6th call, her lawyer training was showing. Tom, I think you should know that I've spoken to Father Donnelly and Brad about tonight. We're all concerned about your mental state. If you're having some kind of breakdown, there are people who can help. My mental state. Already she was building a case, establishing a narrative where I was the unstable one, the husband who'd snapped under pressure and started making wild accusations. It was smart, actually. If she could convince people I was having a breakdown, then nothing I said about her affair would be taken seriously. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She thought I was the same man I'd been yesterday, the trusting fool who would eventually come home, apologize for making a scene, and pretend everything was fine. She didn't understand that the man who'd walked out of that house was gone forever. The next morning was Christmas Day, but I wasn't feeling particularly festive. I drove to the 24-hour diner on Route 9 and had breakfast while I planned my next move. The place was nearly empty except for a few truckers and shift workers who couldn't be home for the holiday. I was working on my 2nd cup of coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my brother Eddie's name. "Merry Christmas, you crazy bastard," he said when I answered. "Helen called me at 6 this morning, crying about how you've lost your mind. Want to tell me what really happened?" Eddie was 3 years younger than me and twice as mean. He worked construction when he could find it, drank too much, and had never met a fight he wouldn't start. He was also the most loyal person I knew. "Jessica's pregnant with Brad's baby," I said without preamble. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Are you sure?" Heard it straight from their mouths. Father Donnelly's in on it too. That sanctimonious piece of garbage. Eddie's voice was getting that edge it got when he was angry. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing violent," I said quickly. "This isn't going to be that kind of fight." "What kind of fight is it going to be?" I thought about Jessica's voicemails, about how quickly she'd moved to establish the narrative that I was unstable. The kind where we use our brains instead of our fists. "Since when do you have brains?" "Since I realized that everyone's been underestimating me for 20 years. Turns out that's been my biggest advantage." "Explain." I told him about the conversation I'd overheard, about Jessica's text messages, about their plan to pass the baby off as mine. I told him about Father Donnelly's role in the deception, and about how they all thought I was too harmless to be a threat. "So what's the plan?" Eddie asked when I finished. "I'm going to give them exactly what they expect," I said. "A harmless man who won't cause any real trouble." "That doesn't sound like much of a plan." "Trust me." Funny choice of words. I spent the rest of Christmas Day gathering information. I drove past Brad's house, a McMansion in the new development on the north side of town, all glass and angles and no character. His Mercedes was in the driveway, along with a car I didn't recognize, probably hiding out, waiting for me to calm down and come to my senses. Then I drove past the church. Father Donnelly's car was there, which meant he was probably preparing for evening mass. I wondered what he planned to say about forgiveness and redemption while he helped cover up my wife's affair. Finally, I went home. Jessica's car was in the driveway, along with Helen's Cadillac. I could see them through the living room window, probably discussing strategies for dealing with my breakdown. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, watching my house like it was a crime scene. In a way, I supposed it was. The scene of the crime, where my marriage had been murdered, where my trust had been buried, where my old life had come to an end. When I walked through the front door, the conversation in the living room stopped abruptly. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her face carefully composed in an expression of concerned relief. "Tom, thank God. We were so worried about you." "Were you?" I hung up my coat and walked past her into the living room. Helen was sitting on the couch, clutching a tissue. Maddie was curled up in the corner chair, watching everything with the fascination of someone observing a particularly interesting car wreck. "Where's Brad?" I asked. "He went home," Jessica said. "He thought it would be better if he wasn't here when you got back." Probably smart. I might have been tempted to do something we'd all regret. Helen sniffled into her tissue. "Tom, I want you to know that I don't believe a word of these terrible accusations you're making. Brad would never—" "Helen," I said gently. "I heard them talking. I saw the text messages. This isn't a misunderstanding or a breakdown or whatever Jessica's been telling you. This is just the truth finally coming out." "Even if that were true," Helen said, her voice getting stronger, "marriages go through difficult times. People make mistakes. The important thing is to forgive and move forward." "Is that what you'd do if you found out your husband was having an affair with your sister?" "That's different." "How?" She couldn't answer that, so she just glared at me like this was all my fault for refusing to play along with their charade. Jessica sat down on the couch next to her mother. "Tom, I think we should see a counselor. Father Donnelly recommended someone. I'll bet he did. This hostility isn't helping anyone. If we're going to work through this, we need to communicate better." Work through this. Like it was a minor disagreement about household chores instead of the complete destruction of our marriage. "What exactly are we working through, Jessica? The part where you're carrying another man's child, or the part where you think I'm too stupid to notice?" "I never said you were stupid." "No, you said I was a trusting fool. There's a difference, I suppose, but not much of one." Maddie looked up from her phone. "So you guys are getting divorced?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jessica and Helen both looked at me, waiting for my answer. I don't know, I said honestly. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. That was true, but not in the way they thought. I hadn't decided exactly how I was going to destroy their lives, but I was definitely going to destroy them. The only question was methodology. Well, Jessica said carefully, maybe we should take some time to think about everything. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a few days while we both figure out what we want. You want me to leave? I think it might be better for everyone, just temporarily until we can discuss this more calmly. She wanted me out of the house, probably so she and Brad could figure out their next move without worrying about what I might overhear. Or maybe so she could start moving money around, protecting her assets before I could file for divorce. All right, I said. I'll pack a bag. The relief on her face was unmistakable. She thought she was getting rid of a problem, buying herself time to regroup and plan. She had no idea she was giving me exactly what I needed, the freedom to move without being watched. I went upstairs and packed enough clothes for a week, along with some other items they wouldn't miss. Jessica's laptop, which she sometimes left logged into her email. The spare key to Brad's house, which he'd given me years ago when I helped him move in. A few documents from our home office that might prove useful later. When I came back downstairs, Jessica was waiting in the hallway. Tom, she said quietly, I want you to know that I never meant for this to happen. Brad and it just sort of evolved. We didn't plan it. Of course not. These things never are planned, are they? They just happen to people who are too weak to resist temptation. It's not about weakness. Sometimes people just connect in ways they don't expect. Is that what you call it? A connection? She looked down at her hands. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I hope someday you'll understand that this doesn't change how much our marriage meant to me. Our marriage, I repeated. The one where you were planning another man's child while I fixed the furnace downstairs. Tom, save it, Jessica. I understand perfectly. You found someone more exciting than your simple mechanic husband, and you decided to trade up. The only thing I don't understand is why you didn't have the courage to tell me before you got pregnant. I walked past her toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Actually, that's not true. I do understand. You didn't tell me because you wanted to have it both ways. The security of being married to someone reliable and the excitement of being with someone who made you feel special. You thought you were smart enough to manage both relationships without anyone getting hurt. That's not... But you made one crucial mistake, Jessica. You assumed I would never find out, and even if I did, I'd be too weak to do anything about it. You thought you married a man who would always choose the easy path, who would always forgive and forget and keep his mouth shut. I opened the front door and felt the cold air rush in. The problem is, that man doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed him on Christmas Eve when you called him a trusting fool. What you're left with is someone you don't know at all. I walked out into the winter night, leaving her standing in the doorway. As I got in my truck, I could see her silhouette against the warm light of our house. The house that was no longer mine. The life that was no longer mine. The future that had been stolen from me. But that was all right. I was about to steal something much more valuable from them, their peace of mind. I rented a room at the Riverside Motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask too many questions. It wasn't much, a bed, a dresser, a bathroom with questionable plumbing, but it served my purposes. More importantly, it was anonymous. A place where I could plan without being observed. The first thing I did was set up Jessica's laptop on the small table by the window. She'd left herself logged into everything: email, social media, cloud storage, even her law firm's client portal. 20 years of marriage had made her careless about digital security around me. After all, what did a simple mechanic know about computers? More than she thought, as it turned out. I'd been teaching myself about technology for years, partly out of curiosity and partly because modern cars were more computer than engine these days. But Jessica had never paid attention to my learning, just like she'd never paid attention to most things about me. Her email was a treasure trove of information. Messages with Brad going back 8 months, charting the progression of their relationship from friendly flirtation to full-blown affair. Messages with Father Donnelly discussing how to manage the situation and protect the family. Messages with her law partners about a big case she was working on, one that could make her a lot of money if it went well. But the most interesting messages were the ones with her divorce attorney. Apparently, Jessica had been planning to leave me even before she got pregnant. She'd been quietly moving money into accounts I didn't know about, documenting every argument we'd had, building a case that would paint me as an unstable husband who'd become increasingly difficult to live with. The pregnancy had complicated her timeline, but not her ultimate goal. If anything, it had made her more determined to get rid of me before the baby was born. She wanted to start fresh with Brad, and I was just an inconvenience to be managed. I spent 3 days reading through everything, taking screenshots, copying files to an external drive. By the time I was finished, I had a complete picture of their plan and enough evidence to destroy all of them in court. But court would be too easy, too clean, too much like the civilized resolution they were all expecting. On the 4th day, I drove to the church during Father Donnelly's office hours. I found him in his study, a cluttered room filled with theological books and the lingering smell of coffee and disappointment. "Tom," he said, when I knocked on his open door. "I was hoping you'd come by. Please sit down." I took the chair across from his desk and looked around the room. Diplomas on the walls, photos of parish events, a crucifix that seemed to be looking down at me with disappointment. "I suppose Jessica asked you to talk to me," I said. "She's concerned about you. We all are." "Are you? Or are you just concerned about what I might do with what I know?" Father Donnelly leaned back in his chair and studied me with those pale blue eyes. "What do you think you know, Tom? I know you've been helping my wife and cousin cover up their affair. I know you've been counseling them on how to handle me. I know you think forgiveness is more important than honesty. Forgiveness is one of the cornerstones of our faith. So is honesty. So is faithfulness. Funny how those seem less important when they're inconvenient." He was quiet for a long moment, then opened his desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 glasses and offered me one. "You're angry," he said. "You have every right to be." "Do I? Because according to everyone else, I should be understanding. I should be willing to work through this. I should forgive and forget, and pretend none of this ever happened. What do you want me to say, Tom? That Jessica and Brad were wrong? Of course they were. That they should have been honest with you from the beginning? Absolutely. But they're human beings, and human beings make mistakes." Mistakes. I took a sip of the whiskey. It was good whiskey, better than anything I could afford. "Is that what we're calling 8 months of lying and cheating and planning to deceive me about the paternity of a child? I'm calling it a situation that requires wisdom and compassion to resolve." "Whose wisdom? Whose compassion? Because it seems to me that all the wisdom and compassion is supposed to come from me, while everyone else gets to do whatever they want." Father Donnelly sighed. "What would you have me do, Tom? Condemn them from the pulpit? Refuse them communion? Turn my back on people who need guidance? I'd have you tell the truth. I'd have you stop helping them lie to me and to themselves. And what would that accomplish? Would it make you feel better? Would it undo what's been done? It might prevent other people from thinking they can get away with this kind of behavior. Or it might destroy 3 lives for the sake of your wounded pride." I set down my glass and looked at him directly. "Father, let me ask you something. If someone came to you in confession and told you they were planning to rob a bank, what would you do?" "I'd counsel them against it, obviously." "But you wouldn't call the police?" "The seal of confession is absolute." "Right. But you also wouldn't help them plan the robbery, would you? You wouldn't give them advice on how to avoid getting caught or how to convince their victims that they deserved to be robbed. His face flushed slightly. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Because it seems to me that's exactly what you've been doing. You've been helping them rob me of my marriage, my trust, my right to make informed decisions about my own life. Tom, and the really interesting part is that you've convinced yourself you're doing it out of compassion. You're not protecting them, Father. You're enabling them. I stood up and walked to the door, then turned back. I want you to know that I don't blame you as much as I blame them. You're just doing what you think is right, even if you're wrong. But Jessica and Brad, they knew exactly what they were doing to me, and they did it anyway. What are you going to do? I'm going to give them what they want. I'm going to be the harmless, trusting fool they think I am. Tom, if you're planning some kind of revenge? I smiled. Father, I'm just planning to tell the truth. I thought you'd approve. That evening, I drove to Murphy's bar and found Eddie waiting for me in a corner booth. He'd been asking questions around town, and he had information I could use. Brad's been bragging, he said without preamble. Telling people at the country club that you're having a breakdown, that Jessica's afraid you might become violent. Is he now? Gets better. He's also been telling people that he's been helping Jessica deal with your increasingly erratic behavior, making himself look like the hero who's protecting your family from you. That's very generous of him. There's more. He's been showing people photos on his phone, pictures of Jessica, some of them pretty intimate. Apparently he thinks it's funny that he's sleeping with his cousin's wife. Something cold settled in my chest. He's showing people pictures of my wife? Your soon-to-be ex-wife, according to him. He told Charlie Morrison that Jessica's going to file for divorce as soon as she can establish grounds for mental instability. Mental instability. So that was their angle. Jessica would claim I'd become dangerous and unpredictable, Brad would testify about my erratic behavior, and Father Donnelly would reluctantly confirm that I'd been making wild accusations and threatening people. It was actually a pretty good plan. It would give Jessica everything she wanted: the house, custody of Maddie, a clean break that didn't require her to admit to adultery. And it would leave me with nothing except a reputation as an unstable man who'd lost his mind when his marriage fell apart. There's something else, Eddie said. Brad's been asking around about your finances. Wants to know how much money you have, what kind of assets you might try to hide in a divorce. Has he found anything interesting? That's what I wanted to ask you. Do you have money he doesn't know about? I thought about the savings account Jessica didn't know existed, the one I'd been putting money into for 15 years. Not much, just $20 or $30 a week from side jobs and overtime, but it had added up over time. Some, I said. How much? Enough. Eddie grinned. Enough for what? Enough to make sure they don't get everything they want. I told him about Jessica's emails, about her secret bank accounts, and her divorce strategy. I told him about Father Donnelly's role in their plan and about Brad's bragging at the country club. So what's the play? Eddie asked. We're going to give them exactly what they expect, I said. A harmless man who's too weak to fight back. I don't follow. They think they know me, Eddie. They think they can predict how I'll react to everything they do. That's going to be their downfall. You're being cryptic. I'm being careful. The moment I start acting unpredictably, they'll change their strategy. But as long as they think I'm harmless, they'll keep making mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind that will destroy them. We talked for another hour, working out the details of what would come next. Eddie would be my eyes and ears around town, gathering information about what Brad and Jessica were telling people. I would continue playing the role of the defeated husband, the man who was slowly accepting that his marriage was over. But underneath the performance, I would be building something else. A trap so carefully constructed that they wouldn't see it until it was too late. As I drove back to the motel that night, I thought about what Father Donnelly had said about revenge. Maybe he was right. Maybe what I was planning was motivated by wounded pride and anger, but it was also motivated by something else: justice. Jessica and Brad had decided that I didn't deserve the truth. They'd decided that my feelings didn't matter, that my right to make informed choices about my own life was less important than their convenience. They'd decided that I was too weak to stop them. They were about to learn how expensive that assumption would be. The plan began with a simple phone call. I waited until the following Monday morning, when I knew Jessica would be at her law firm and Brad would be showing houses to clients. Then I called Jessica's office and asked to speak with her secretary. "Hi, this is Tom Henderson, Jessica's husband. I'm trying to reach her about a family emergency, but her cell phone seems to be turned off." "Oh my," the secretary said. "Is everything all right?" "It's my mother-in-law. She's had a fall, and we need to get to the hospital. Could you please have Jessica call me immediately?" "Of course, Mr. Henderson. I'll get her out of her meeting right away." Jessica called back within 5 minutes, her voice tight with concern. "Tom, what happened to my mother?" "Nothing happened to your mother, Jessica. I just needed to talk to you, and I knew you wouldn't take my call otherwise." There was a long pause. "That's a terrible thing to do. I thought she was hurt." "Is it more terrible than lying to your husband for 8 months about carrying another man's child?" "Tom, we've been through this. If you want to discuss our situation, we can do it through lawyers." "Actually, I was calling to tell you that won't be necessary. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've decided you're right. We should get divorced." Another pause, longer this time. "You have?" "I have. I'm tired of fighting about this. You want to be with Brad, and clearly our marriage hasn't been making either of us happy for a long time. Maybe it's better if we just end it cleanly." "Tom, I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." "I'm trying to be. I know I handled things badly on Christmas Eve. I was angry and hurt, and I said some things I shouldn't have said. We both said things we didn't mean. The thing is, Jessica, I don't want this to get ugly. I don't want to hurt Maddie any more than we already have, and I don't want to drag our personal business through the courts." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we handle this like adults. We divide our assets fairly, we work out custody arrangements for Maddie, and we both move on with our lives." She was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. "Jessica? I'm here. I'm just surprised. This isn't what I expected from you." "What did you expect?" "I thought you'd fight. I thought you'd try to make this as difficult as possible." "Why would I do that? What would be the point? You've made your choice, and I can't change that. All I can do is try to salvage some dignity from the situation." "I think that's very mature of you." "I hope so. I've been talking to Father Donnelly, and he's helped me understand that holding on to anger isn't good for anyone." That was a lie, of course. I hadn't spoken to Father Donnelly since our conversation in his study, but I knew Jessica would find it reassuring to think that he was counseling me toward acceptance. "I'm glad," she said. "He's a wise man." "He is. He helped me see that this situation isn't really anyone's fault. Sometimes people just grow apart, and sometimes they find connections with other people that they can't ignore." "That's exactly right. That's exactly what happened." "I know. And I want you to know that I don't blame you for falling in love with Brad. He's a good man, and he'll make you happy in ways I never could." "Tom, you don't have to say that." "Yes, I do. Because it's true. You deserve to be with someone who excites you, someone who makes you feel special. I'm sorry I couldn't be that person." By the time I hung up, Jessica was practically crying with relief. She'd been prepared for a bitter fight, for accusations and demands and threats. Instead, I'd given her everything she wanted. A graceful exit from our marriage with no recriminations and no drama. Of course, what she didn't understand was that I'd also just recorded our entire conversation on the digital recorder I'd bought at the electronics store. A conversation in which she'd essentially admitted to the affair and confirmed that she was planning to leave me for Brad. The next call was to Brad's office. Brad Henderson Real Estate, this is Brad. Brad, it's Tom. Do you have a minute to talk? Tom. His voice was cautious. How are you doing? Better, actually. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For being honest with me about you and Jessica. I know it couldn't have been easy, and I appreciate that you didn't let this go on any longer than it had to. We didn't exactly tell you, Tom. You found out on your own. I know, but you could have denied it. You could have tried to make me think I was imagining things. Instead, you were man enough to let me see the truth. I'm not sure what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm not angry anymore. Jessica and I should have ended our marriage years ago. We were both just too comfortable to make the change. Tom, I want you to know that neither of us planned for this to happen. I know that. Love isn't something you can plan or control. It just happens, and when it does, you have to follow your heart. That's very understanding of you. I'm trying to be. The thing is, Brad, I want you to know that you have my blessing. Your blessing? To marry Jessica, to raise the baby together, to be the family you both want to be. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I know it sounds strange, I continued, but I want you both to be happy. Jessica deserves a man who loves her completely, and you deserve a woman who chooses you without reservation. I was never going to be able to give her what she needed. I don't know what to say, Tom. This is unexpected. I know. But I've been talking to Father Donnelly, and he's helped me understand that forgiveness is more important than pride. Father Donnelly said that? He did. He said that holding on to anger would only hurt me in the long run. He said the Christian thing to do was to wish you both well and move on with my life. That's very Christian of you. I'm trying to be a better man than I was. Part of that means admitting when I've been wrong. Wrong about what? About thinking I could make Jessica happy. About thinking our marriage was worth saving. About thinking you were the villain in this situation. I never wanted to hurt you, Tom. I know that now. You fell in love with an amazing woman, and she fell in love with you. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be celebrated. By the time I finished with Brad, he was so relieved he was practically offering to help me pack. Like Jessica, he'd been prepared for anger and accusations and threats. Instead, I'd given him absolution and my blessing to steal my wife. I made similar calls to Father Donnelly and to Helen, each time playing the role of the defeated husband who'd finally accepted reality, each time expressing gratitude for their patience with my anger and my willingness to move forward without bitterness, each time recording every word they said. By the end of the week, everyone in my family was talking about how well I was handling the situation, how mature I was being, how graciously I was accepting the end of my marriage. Eddie thought I'd lost my mind. "You're just going to let them win?" he asked when we met at Murphy's that Friday night. "Am I?" "Sounds like it. Sounds like you're giving up and not putting up a fight." "That's exactly what I'm doing." "Why?" "Because that's what they expect me to do. That's what they need me to do. I don't follow." I pulled out my phone and played him excerpts from the conversations I'd recorded. Jessica admitting to the affair, Brad confirming that the baby was his, Father Donnelly acknowledging his role in covering up the situation. "You recorded all of this?" "Every word." "Is it legal?" "In this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation." I consented. Eddie grinned. "So what's the plan?" "The plan is to let them think they've won. Let them get comfortable. Let them make more mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that will destroy them completely." Over the next 2 weeks, I played my role perfectly. I moved out of the house permanently, taking only my personal belongings and leaving everything else for Jessica. I signed papers agreeing to an amicable divorce. I even helped Brad move some of his things into my old house. Everyone was amazed by my maturity and grace under pressure. The whole town was talking about what a decent man I was, how I was putting my family's happiness ahead of my own wounded pride. But while I was playing the role of the gracious loser, I was also gathering more evidence, more recordings, more proof of their deception and manipulation, and I was planning something that would make everything they'd done to me look like a minor inconvenience. The trap was almost ready. All I needed now was the perfect moment to spring it. That moment came when Jessica called to invite me to dinner. "I know this might seem strange," she said, "but Brad and I would like to take you out to dinner, to thank you for being so understanding about everything." "That's very thoughtful." We were thinking Saturday night at Romano's, just the three of us, so we can talk about the future and make sure we're all on the same page. Romano's was the fanciest restaurant in town, the place where people went to celebrate special occasions. It was also very public, very visible. Everyone would see us having dinner together, the three of us looking like civilized adults who'd worked out their differences amicably. "I'd like that," I said. "Really?" "Really. I think it would be good for all of us." "Tom, I have to say, you've been amazing about this whole situation. I know it can't be easy for you." "It's not easy, but it's right. You and Brad belong together, and I'm happy that you found each other." "You're a good man, Tom Henderson." "I'm trying to be." Saturday night couldn't come fast enough. Everything was in place. All the pieces were arranged exactly where I needed them to be. It was time to show them what happened when a trusting fool stopped being trusting. Romano's was busy for a Saturday night, filled with couples celebrating anniversaries and families marking special occasions. I arrived exactly on time and found Jessica and Brad waiting at a corner table, both of them dressed like they were attending a business meeting rather than dinner with the husband they'd betrayed. Jessica stood up and gave me an awkward hug when I approached the table. She was starting to show now, just barely, but enough that anyone who knew what to look for could see the slight curve of her belly beneath her dress. "Tom, you look good," she said, rested. "I've been sleeping better lately," I said, which was true. There's something peaceful about having a plan. Brad stood up and shook my hand like we were old friends meeting for drinks. "Thanks for coming, buddy. I know this is a little unusual." "Not unusual," I said, taking my seat. "Just honest. I appreciate honesty." We ordered drinks and made small talk about the weather, about Maddie's college plans, about Brad's real estate business. Anyone watching us would have seen three adults having a pleasant dinner together, working out the details of a civilized divorce. They had no idea they were attending their own execution. "Tom," Jessica said after our entrees arrived, "Brad and I wanted to talk to you about the timeline for everything. We don't want to rush, but we also want to be practical about the situation." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" "Well, the baby's due in July," Brad said. "We'd like to be married before then, if possible. For the sake of appearances, you understand." "Of course, appearances are important." "We were thinking maybe April," Jessica suggested. "That would give us time to finalize the divorce and plan a small ceremony." "April sounds perfect. Spring weddings are always nice." They exchanged a glance across the table, probably surprised by how accommodating I was being. "There's something else," Jessica said carefully. "We've been talking about the house." "What about it?" "Well, it's going to be too small for our family once the baby comes. We were thinking about selling it and buying something bigger." "That makes sense. You'll need more room." "The thing is, we'd like to buy you out of your share now, rather than waiting for the divorce to be finalized. It would be simpler for everyone." I took a sip of my wine and considered this. They wanted to buy me out of the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 15 years, the house where I'd built the deck and finished the basement and fixed every broken thing that had ever needed fixing. "What kind of number are we talking about?" Brad pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "We had it appraised. Based on current market conditions and the outstanding mortgage, your equity share comes to about $43,000. I looked at the appraisal documents. The house was worth more than I'd expected, which meant my share was worth more than $43,000, but they were counting on me being too trusting to question their math. "This seems fair," I said, closing the folder. "Really?" Jessica looked surprised. "You don't want to have your own appraiser look at it?" "Why would I? I trust you." There was that word again, trust. The thing they'd been counting on for 8 months, the weakness they'd exploited to get everything they wanted. "We could have the money transferred to your account as early as Monday," Brad said. "That would be great. I'm looking at a place of my own, and the down payment would be helpful." We finished dinner while discussing practical details, when I'd pick up the rest of my belongings, how we'd handle Maddie's visits, what we'd tell people about our amicable divorce. They were both relaxed now, confident that they'd successfully managed a difficult situation. As we were waiting for the check, Jessica reached across the table and touched my hand. "Tom, I want you to know how much this means to me. The way you've handled everything, the grace you've shown, it means more than I can say. You don't have to thank me, Jessica. I just want you to be happy. I am happy, happier than I've been in years. I can see that. You're glowing." She smiled and put her hand on her stomach. "I feel like everything is finally falling into place." "It is," I said. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Brad paid the check, and we walked out into the cold January night together. Several people had noticed us during dinner, and I could see them watching through the restaurant windows as we said our goodbyes in the parking lot. "This was nice," Brad said, shaking my hand again. "We should do it again sometime." "We should," I agreed. "Maybe after the baby's born. I'd like to meet my new nephew or niece." Jessica gave me another hug, longer this time. "You're going to be okay, Tom. You're going to find someone who appreciates you." "I'm sure I will. And you're going to be very happy with Brad. He's exactly what you deserve." They drove away in Brad's Mercedes, probably congratulating themselves on how well they'd managed the evening. They'd gotten everything they wanted, my blessing, my cooperation, and my agreement to sell them my share of the house for less than it was worth. What they didn't know was that I'd recorded every word of our conversation with the digital recorder in my jacket pocket. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording all of our conversations for weeks, building a comprehensive record of their deception and manipulation. And what they really didn't know was that I'd spent the afternoon making copies of everything: the recordings, Jessica's emails, Brad's text messages, financial records showing Jessica's hidden accounts, and mailing them to people who would find them very interesting. People like Jessica's law partners, who would be fascinated to learn that one of their associates had been conducting an affair while building a fraudulent case against her husband. People like Brad's real estate clients, who would be interested to know that their agent had been boasting about his personal affairs at the country club. People like the bishop, who would want to know that Father Donnelly had been helping parishioners cover up adultery. And people like the editor of our local newspaper, who would find the whole story irresistible, especially the parts about the prominent lawyer, the successful real estate agent, and the respected priest who'd conspired to deceive an honest working man. The packages would be delivered Monday morning, while Jessica and Brad were celebrating their victory and planning their new life together. By Monday afternoon, their lives would be in ruins. I drove home to my motel room and poured myself a drink from the bottle of good whiskey I'd bought for the occasion. Then I sat by the window and looked out at the lights of the town where I'd lived my entire life, the place where everyone knew everyone else's business, the place where reputation mattered more than money. Jessica had been right about one thing. I was too trusting. For 20 years, I'd trusted her to be faithful, trusted Brad to be loyal, trusted Father Donnelly to be honest. I'd trusted them all to treat me with the same respect I'd shown them. But Jessica had been wrong about something else. She'd thought that being trusting made me weak, made me harmless, made me someone who could be safely betrayed and discarded. She was about to learn the difference between being trusting and being stupid. I raised my glass in a toast to the empty room. To trust, I said, and to the people who mistake it for weakness. Then I drank the whiskey and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in months. Monday was going to be a very interesting day. Epilogue. Reckoning I didn't have to wait long to see the results. By 10 o'clock Monday morning, my phone was ringing constantly. Jessica called 6 times in 20 minutes, her voice getting more frantic with each message. Brad called twice, then apparently gave up. Even Father Donnelly tried to reach me, though I couldn't imagine what he thought he could say. I let them all go to voicemail while I sat in the diner on Route 9, drinking coffee and reading the morning paper. The editor had worked fast. There was already a small item on page 3 about a developing story involving local prominent figures. By tomorrow, it would be front-page news. The first person to find me in person was Eddie, who walked into the diner grinning like he'd won the lottery. Holy hell, Tom. You really did it. Did what? Destroyed them. Jessica's law firm put her on administrative leave this morning. Brad's real estate office has been fielding calls all morning from angry clients. And word is, the bishop is sending someone down from the diocese to investigate Father Donnelly. Is that so? That's not even the best part. Helen called me, crying about how you've ruined the family reputation. Apparently she's been getting calls from her church friends all morning, asking if it's true that her daughter was cheating on her husband with his cousin. I took a sip of my coffee and tried to look appropriately concerned. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? Tom, you've turned them into the biggest scandal this town has seen in 20 years. Jessica's going to lose her job, Brad's going to lose his business, and Father Donnelly's going to lose his parish. I suppose they should have thought about that before they decided to lie to me for 8 months. What are you going to do now? Now? Now I'm going to finish my coffee and go look at that apartment I've been considering. Life goes on. That's it? You're just going to disappear while they deal with the fallout? What else would I do? I'm just a simple mechanic, remember? This is way above my pay grade. Eddie laughed and shook his head. You know what the really beautiful part is? They can't even claim you lied about anything. Every single thing in those recordings and emails is true. They destroyed themselves with their own words. Truth has a way of doing that. So what happens next? Next, Jessica files for divorce like she always planned to. She gets half of nothing instead of half of everything, since she'll probably lose her job and Brad's business is going to collapse. They get to raise their baby in poverty while everyone in town knows exactly how that baby was conceived. And you? I get to start over. Clean slate, no baggage, no one expecting me to be someone I'm not. You don't sound bitter. Why would I be bitter? I got exactly what I wanted. Which was? Justice. They thought they could treat me like a fool and get away with it. They thought my trust made me weak. They were wrong. Eddie was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you regret any of it? I considered the question while I watched the traffic go by outside the diner window. Did I regret destroying the lives of people I'd once loved? Did I regret turning my family into a public scandal? Did I regret choosing revenge over forgiveness? No, I said finally. I don't regret any of it. They made their choices, and I made mine. Even Jessica? You were married to her for 20 years. Especially Jessica. She knew me better than anyone, and she still chose to betray me. She still chose to think I was too weak to fight back. And Father Donnelly? Father Donnelly forgot that his job is to counsel people toward honesty, not help them perfect their lies. What about Maddie? That was the only question that gave me pause. My daughter was 17 years old, and she was about to watch her mother's life fall apart in the most public way possible. Maddie's smart, I said finally. She'll figure out how to navigate this, and maybe she'll learn something about the consequences of treating people like they don't matter. You really have changed, haven't you? Yes, I have. The trusting fool they all knew is gone. What's left is someone who understands that trust isn't a virtue unless it's earned, and that sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it yourself. I finished my coffee and left money on the table. As I walked toward the door, Eddie called after me. Tom, what would you have done if they'd just been honest with you from the beginning? I stopped and turned back to him. If Jessica had come to me 8 months ago and said she'd fallen in love with Brad and wanted a divorce, I would have been hurt, but I would have let her go. I would have wished them well and moved on with my life. But they didn't do that. No, they didn't. They chose to lie and cheat and manipulate. They chose to treat me like I was too stupid to deserve the truth. They chose to think they were smarter than me. And now? Now they know better. I walked out of the diner and got in my truck. As I drove through the center of town, I could see people standing in small groups, talking quietly and looking at their phones. The story was spreading, the way stories always spread in small towns. By evening, everyone would know what Jessica and Brad had done, and everyone would know how I'd responded. Some people would think I'd gone too far. Some would say I should have been more forgiving, more understanding, more willing to work things out quietly. But some people would understand that there are consequences for treating others like they don't matter. Some people would understand that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. And everyone would understand that the quiet mechanic they'd all underestimated was capable of things they'd never imagined. I drove to the apartment complex on the other side of town and signed a lease for a small but clean one-bedroom unit. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was honest. No secrets, no lies, no pretense. As I filled out the paperwork, my phone buzzed with another call from Jessica. I glanced at the screen, then turned the phone off. We had nothing left to say to each other. The trusting fool she'd married was gone forever, and what remained was someone she'd never really known at all. Someone who understood that sometimes the only way to win is to make sure everyone else loses. Someone who'd learned that trust, once betrayed, becomes the most dangerous weapon of all.